and welcome to the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast with me, Clive Barber, and my good mate, Noel Tom. For the days when you can't ride your bike, there's always the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast. Welcome to this, the 7th episode of the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast. In this episode, we're talking to a guy called Tim Cooper, otherwise known as UK Jeeper. You can look at his blog on WordPress. Tim's just completed a 11,000 mile, 6-week trip of the Trans-America Trail, the TAT. So Tim's going to fill us in on his planning, how he got there, why he chose the Honda CB500X, with Rally Raid accessories on it, and lots of other good stuff about the trip. I hope you enjoy it.
Took redundancy back in February. Took the money and ran because I got 8 years in, so I was waiting for that. I wanted to get out anyway because the place had dried up work-wise. Took the money. I thought, well, I've got a nice chunk of change here. I'll have an adventure. And I thought, well, I've never done the road trip across the States. I've never done a full-on trip across the States. I mean, not exactly true. I've flown a helicopter across the States. I've flown a light plane across the States. I've driven an RV across the States, but never on my time, as it were, in my, the way I want to do it. And so eventually I came around to the idea, or wifey suggested that maybe it's time to get back on a bike and do the road trip you never did when I met her. Because originally I moved to the States. I was going to travel the States, buy a bike, travel around, do the whole 23-year-old thing that you do. And she said, well, you never got to have your road trip. You never got to have your explore across the States because, we end up hooking up and having kids way too early. But she said, maybe it's time. So I thought, all right.
Wow, she's a good wife.
Yeah, she's a keeper. Well, 27 years, she kind of has to be. So decided, yeah, all right. Looked into my California license, see if it was still good, but it was well expired. So I thought, well, I'll take my direct access. Took the direct access. The day after I passed my Mod 2, I went up to Rally Raid and picked up the bike that I bought 2 days before passing my dad's.
So you've ridden quite a bit in the US, obviously, when you were living there, because you were couriering and stuff like that, weren't you?
Somebody's read the blog.
Twice.
Oh my God. Yes. When I moved out there, I started working under the radar, under the table. Can't really do that anymore, but working under the radar. And I noticed there was a whole bunch of, I finally found out there's a whole bunch of ex-London couriers that had gone out there and they were working as bike messengers over there. Because obviously being a motorcycle messenger in LA versus London, no brainer. So I thought, well, I'll get in on that. So I went out and bought a bike. First time I'd ridden a bike in 5 years.
And what age were you at this?
23.
Was this pre-marriage and children then? 23,
yeah,
okay.
90. So, 23.
Right.
Yeah, so went out and bought a 550, GS 550.
Courier classic.
No, a CX 500 you're thinking of.
Well, I seem to remember when I worked in the city, the guys were all riding 550 four-cylinder Kawasaki's, actually.
That's quite likely. But no, So, yes, bought a GS 550. Managed to con a courier company into paying me under the table. And ended up doing 5 years of it. But eventually I started to run out of luck. I had 3 accidents in 5 months. 3 of those months I was actually off with a broken shoulder, as you do. And after the last one where I got rear-ended on the freeway by an SUV, that hurt. Didn't actually break anything, but I should have actually been dead. I was on the 10 freeway in LA and I slowed down for traffic that had stopped in front of me. And just as I put my foot on the ground, I heard, started to get run over a lot. So I decided, okay, I'm done with that.
Can't say I blame you. But you've also done, you said you fly as well. You have flown.
Well, actually, I've been a messenger for long enough and decided I need to get an actual career. So I did actually knock it on the head and I went to flight school in Long Beach, California, where they make the C-17s, amongst other things. And so, I enrolled in flight school and ended up getting my private helicopter, private single engine plane, commercial helicopter and flight instructor licenses for helicopters.
That's very impressive.
Thank you. But yeah, one of those was, there's the movie Twister. Remember Twister, Helen Hunt?
Is that the one where they're chasing the twisters?
Yes, that's good.
Tornadoes, great. Yeah.
Yeah. So my flight instructor, his second job was actually working at a helicopter film company, where you rent helicopters and they put one of those gyro cams on there and fly around. Or they're in the movie itself. He said he had a trip coming up where they had to ferry fly, which is basically take an aircraft from one place to another to be used at that other location. He had a ferry flight, which he wasn't able to do because of other commitments. So he said, do you want to go with our lead pilot and fly this Jet Ranger, which is the helicopter everyone's heard of, the Jet Ranger, from LA on the West Coast all the way to Oklahoma.
Wow.
So, yeah, it took me about that long to think about it.
So you were delivering it to somebody else, were you?
Yeah. So basically what it was the helicopter that we flew from LA, or Van Nuys, which is LA, out to Ponca City, Oklahoma, was going to get used in the movie Twister for all the aerial shots. So if you ever watch the movie and there's pictures taken from the air, that was in the helicopter that I flew out there.
Fantastic.
It was fun. It was an interesting flight because the first day we got to about Williams, Arizona, and we had snow, and we basically couldn't see more than about a half a mile. And I was flying the helicopter, and the other guy was checking the GPS to find out where the hell the airport was because we couldn't actually see it.
Wow. Terrifying.
And the following day, we were coming up to Albuquerque, and it was raining, and the ground was coming up. The ground was getting not steeper, more higher in altitude, but the clouds were getting lower. And then we were flying along, and it kept raining harder and harder and harder. And then we eventually realized that the rain was now actually hitting the helicopter and freezing. It was freezing rain. We're in a helicopter.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So we sat down in the field next to the I-40, and he jumped out, had a look at the air intakes to see if they were freezing up, because that would be bad. They weren't too bad. So we turned around and flew back into warmer rain all the way back out to Tucumcari, New Mexico. Yeah, Tucumcari, New Mexico, sat down for the night. And then the following day we made it to Albuquerque. So that was an interesting trip. Lots of fun.
Yeah, good experience, I guess.
Yep. And then I flew a light plane, a Cessna 182, from LA out to Dallas. I went with my flight instructor at the time because we were both helicopter pilots as well. And we wanted to go see the helicopter expo that they had at the Dallas Convention Center. So we flew a light plane out to Dallas, and I got some instrument time on the way. That was part of the reason for going, and so I could get some practice. Yes. But again, it was never on my schedule. And then I've driven an RV from Connecticut to California, so literally from one corner to the other. And I had to do that in 5 days. It was my father-in-law's one. He had a stroke, ended up in hospital. I needed to go out and get his RV and bring it back to California. So I flew over there, not myself at the time, a commercial. Flew over there, picked up the RV, and drove it basically for 10 hours a day, every day, from one corner to the other. Didn't get to see anything. Basically, you fill up with petrol in the morning, fill up with petrol at lunchtime, drive until you can't see straight anymore, go to sleep, wake up, repeat. So I'd never really done a road trip, a proper trip across the States. It was always, on a schedule, had to be in certain places at certain times. I thought, well, I'll do something fun with my redundancy money. And the idea eventually became ride across the States.
Because your blog is called UK Jeeper, which is on WordPress, isn't it? When it's a very good read, so
Thank you.
Everybody should definitely read it. Well, I think that's how I first came across you, really, because was it on Facebook on Adventure Bike Rider? I think, were you posting your daily blogs on there or something like that? That's where I came across your trip and started following you, and then you've kind of published lots more pictures and the full blog on as I say, UK Jeeper on WordPress. Yep. But obviously there's a story there as well with another means of transport with the Jeeps, I guess.
Yeah, there is. Basically, once I got done getting run over on motorcycles, I decided it was time to get something a bit safer. So I took some of my insurance payout, because obviously being in the States, you get a chunk of change because it's, litigious. So I took some of and also the other thing is when I got ran over, it was actually working. Or I was actually at work at the time. So I had workers' comp as well. So I had a nice, fairly decent chunk of change. So I thought, well, I'm going to get something a bit safer to get around in. And I eventually bought a Jeep Wrangler, which was the shorter one. And my personalized, because you can do that in the States, personalized license plate ended up being UKJEEPR, UK Jeeper. So that was my name. So I was the UK driving a Jeep in the States. That's where the name comes from.
So were you doing sort of trail driving, mud plugging out there, or was it just your daily driver?
Yes, both. I commute to work in it, and at the weekends I go up to places like Big Bear, Lake Arrowhead, Los Coyotes, and other off-road trails, and have a blast around, and then drive it again to work on Monday.
Presumably a bigger country, there's more space and less restrictions to do that sort of thing over there?
More space. Restrictions are becoming as much of an issue as they are for people over here. They have lost a lot of trails over there, a lot of well-known trails for various reasons, some political, some Green Party type stuff. And also one of the trails we used to ride was an area on an Indian reservation where they'd make a little bit of extra side cash by letting us pay to go and drive around these trails at the weekend. But a change in legislation by the federal government allowed Indian casinos to become more widespread. So instead of a bunch of guys bouncing around on 4x4s at the weekend, they had casinos where obviously they make a ton of money. So they didn't need us around anymore to make their income. So they closed the trails. For various reasons, a lot of the places over there are actually closing.
So like a lot of people, that sounds like from, you said 1990 you were riding as a courier, and then you've had a break from bikes for a good few years.
Yeah, basically I stopped riding for about 22 years after I got done getting run over, because I had to make a choice, keep running the risk. Because I do 50,000 miles a year on a motorcycle, couriering all over the place. Some of the trips would be 150, 200 miles each way, depending on where I had to go. So I crank out the miles every year. And obviously, as we know, the chances of something painful happening to you when you put that many miles on becomes an issue. So I thought, well, I've got 2 young kids, got a wife, got to stay alive. So I took some of my payout and bought another computer, which I was using at home while I was rehabbing and my shoulder was being repaired, and played with that, broke it, and eventually figured out enough to blag my way into a desktop support role, computer support role, and never really looked back. Got into something quote unquote safer. Flying helicopters or riding motorcycles, I went into tapping on keyboards.
And that's what you're still doing now, by the sound of things.
That's what I'm still doing now. And in fact, as you know, I just got another job doing it. So it actually could be interesting, because I'm actually going to be working for the Metropolitan Police.
Can we talk a little bit about the bike you chose to do the trip and how you made that decision?
Once I decided that that's what I was going to do, go take a bike trip across the States. Well, we'll back up slightly. I was looking at, ways to do a ride across the States. And, I was looking at the standards, the Route 66s and all the tarmac ways of getting across the States. And it just didn't really appeal. It just wasn't ringing my bell. And, like I said, I got into Jeeps, got into off-roading, bounced around a lot, enjoy that side of things, because it's a lot more challenging than just sitting on a road cranking out mile after mile after mile, because you have to figure out how you're going to do it. I stumbled across a route that's called the Trans-America Trail, which is a cross-country route that is almost all dirt, so all gravel roads and dirt and rock roads, and some of them are very smooth, some of them are very bumpy, but it's not just sitting there on the highway just doing mile after mile. And it goes from one coast of the States to the other coast, and it's about 5,000 miles long. And I thought, that actually sounds interesting. So I read up on that, decided that's the way I wanted to go. So the next choice was what vehicle to take. I briefly entertained the idea of shipping my Wrangler back over to the States, because when I moved here, I brought it with me. Shipping it back over there and driving across the state on these dirt roads. Then I looked at the finances and how much it would cost to ship it over there, and the fact that it does 16 miles to the gallon over a 5,000 mile trip didn't really appeal. Yes, exactly. So I thought, well, yeah, that's when the idea of getting back on a bike came up. So I started looking at which bikes would do it and reading up on all the forums and the TAT Facebook pages. And, the obvious answer seemed to be a KLR 650, which some people say is too big. Then you had the whole conversation about which bike is too big, which bike is too small. Because yes, it's it's a lot of dirt roads. So a small bike like a Honda 250 Rally or something like that would appeal to some people, but it's also 5,000 miles on a 250, which doesn't appeal. So I looked around. I looked at bigger bikes, looked at smaller bikes. Nothing really rang my bell. And then I heard about this bike called the Honda CB500X and started looking into that. And I ran into somebody called Jenny Morgan, who had actually done the trail as part of testing, basically, for a company called Rally Raid, who make aftermarket parts for the CB500X. Because as it comes out of the factory, it's just an adventure-styled, quote-unquote, bike that doesn't really, it's not that great off-road. It's not really an adventure bike, although it's built as such. Jenny had actually ridden this bike, tried the bike, and also heard that quite a few people in the States were looking into ways of making it more of an adventure bike, because not everybody wants a 1200 GS. So she'd gone to her company at Partners, Rally Raid, and said, hey, look, take this bike, see what we can do with it. Can we upgrade the suspension? Can we make a engine guard for it? What else can we do to make it actually more of an adventure rather than quote-unquote adventure bike? And to test it out, she'd actually ridden an earlier version of one of the CBs across the States from one side to the other and back again, I believe. And so I ended up getting into a Facebook conversation with her, asking her all questions, what about this? What about this? How did you find it did this? How could it cope with that? And she was a great asset, a great help. And then one day she popped up and she said, well, actually Rally Raid is selling one of their demo bikes, the 2017 demo bikes from last year. So I got in touch with Rally Raid, with John. It turned out, yeah, they did. So they sent me over the specs and I looked it over and we had a bit of a haggle over, what parts I needed, what parts I didn't. And eventually I just said, okay, we'll keep the upgraded suspension on the bike because from everything I've read, their suspension changes make it a much better bike both on and off the road, and keep the engine guard on there as well, because if it's going to be bouncing around on rocks and logs and stuff like that, I want to be able to protect the engine. So yeah, we agreed a price on basically a stock Rally Raid, keeping the stock wheels on there, keeping everything else stock except the suspension and the engine guard. And then John called a few days later and he said, hey, look we actually managed to drop one of our custom made tubeless spoked wheels off the storage rack here at the warehouse, and we've chipped the powder coat. And if you're not too bothered about how it looks, having a bit of a chip in the powder coat, and I can find a matching chipped front one, I'll do you a deal on the wheels as well. And I said, well, obviously I'm not too fussed about it because my plan is to go and, pound the hell out of it. So yeah, we came to a price, so I ended up getting the wheels as well.
Yeah, I think the spoke wheels make sense because I think the problem with the cast ones, if I understand it correctly, is that they can just crack and break, and kind of then that's So the spoke ones have got a lot more give in them.
Exactly.
Obviously more. So is it a 19-inch front wheel?
No, there's a difference. You can do two levels of conversion on the Rally Raid suspension and setup. You've got what's called the level 1, which keeps the stock height the same factory height. So you're not getting raised up at all. It just provides a much better suspension, and you can adjust the preload, and you can adjust the dampening on the rear, and you can adjust. The one I have, the later model actually comes with a factory preload on the front forks, but it gives a better rate on the springs. All you're doing is swapping up the springs front and rear, but it keeps the stock height. If you keep the stock height, then you stay with the stock sized wheels, which are 17-inch front and rear. If you want to have, and some people prefer having a taller front wheel because it's supposed to help the steering off the road, you can go for a 19-inch front wheel that they make. But to do that, you have to upgrade. You have to change it to what's called their level 2 suspension, which actually raises the bike, I think it's 2 inches. 2 inches further away from the ground, but also which allows you to fit a 19-inch front wheel in there. But it also raises the bike another 2 inches at the saddle as well. And I've sat on level 2s, and they're actually a little too tall than I was comfortable with. This bike was already a level 1, so it's still the stock height, but with the upgraded suspension. So I just stayed with that.
So how did you find it? Did it work for you? Do you wish you'd done anything else to it?
I was happy. Having had it all this time now, and I've put 20,000 miles on it since April, including the 11,000 miles around the States. I'm very happy with it. I think it was the perfect bike for the trip and for me on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I've driven it from one side of the States to the other, and I've been driving it into London and back as a commuter bike. And it's, everything I ask it to do, it just does. And it's worked really, really well. Would I have gone with the level 2 if the opportunity came up? If I, suddenly won the lotto and thought to upgrade from level 1 to level 2? Yeah, possibly. But obviously there's not as much of a need for that now because the 2019 version comes with a 19-inch front wheel as standard.
Yes, as you correctly pointed out after we stated on the last podcast, it was the same bike. Yes, thank you for putting us right on that one.
I think Honda have actually been lurking on the CB500X forums and seeing what people have been doing as far as rally raid, because the tall suspension, the 19-inch front wheel, the 12-volt accessory socket that they have on there now, and a gear indicator. They've basically been, I think Honda have actually been reading what people have been saying about the current 500Xs and narrowed it down to what people have been looking for the most and done it, made those changes.
Well, it does. I mean, obviously the market dictates what they're going to do, but it does seem like a lot of people are buying these bikes to take them, on some off-road trails as well. So it must be, at least doubling the audience for the bike, and that's going to make them think about what they're doing, I guess.
Yeah, I do think, like I said, that I think some manufacturers don't seem to be too fussed. They may look on the forums, they may read them, but they don't really make the changes. I think Honda possibly, I'm not saying they have, I think Honda possibly have actually been reading up on what people have done with their X's, 500X's, and thought, well, let's make those changes straight out of the factory. I think that's been a good thing. So I think they actually have been giving, I know you said they are, they respond to the market, but I don't think a lot of manufacturers actually do. I think Honda have done in this case.
That's good news. And you've taken a trip back up to visit John, and he's had a look over the bike and take a view on what needs improving, I guess.
Yes, I've been up a couple of times since I've got back, and I think they were quite interested in the engine guard, because being the stock height and going over some of the trails, especially the mountain passes, the Rockies in Colorado, the engine guard took an absolute pounding. It's just the plate that's there, it was just bent 5 ways to Sunday. And they were interested to see just how it held up as the stock height. Because when Jenny took hers, she'd had the higher clearance suspension put on there, but they wanted to see how it would handle a stock height bike, and just how much the abuse the engine guard took, but still held together, which they were quite interested in that.
Is it, because I know on my 990 I ordered a Black Dog one, which I think was 4 or 5 millimeter thick steel, and it was as tough as anything. Are the Rally Raid ones aluminium, or are they steel as well?
The bottoms are steel. They have there is a smaller guard that goes in front of the oil filter across the front of the engine. That is aluminium, whatever. And there is a smaller one on the side by the gear shifter. Sorry, by the rear brake, wrong side. By the brake that protects from anything hitting the engine from the side. But the big plate on the bottom that's welded to the frame, not welded to the bike frame, welded to the engine guard frame itself. That's a fairly substantial chunk of steel.
Yeah, no, I'm interested actually, because I'm going to be in the market for a new bike in the middle of next year for doing some more travelling again, and I think the CBX is certainly something I'm considering, because it would be good for, as you say, good for road work and also good for TET type trips. And my mate Greg is loving his. In fact, he's rarely out on his enduro bike now. He seems to be doing an awful lot on his CBX, and he's absolutely loving it. So it is certainly something I would consider getting. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's a very underrated bike. I think a lot of people just think, it was just made to look like an adventure bike, and I think originally it was. It just had adventure bike styling, but then, first of all, the community, if you want to call it that, started chucking up springs from other bikes into them, just to see if they could get them to work better. And then obviously Rally Raid came along and completely changed the market, if you like, and what the bike could actually do, because they came out with, proper custom made parts, aftermarket parts for that bike. And I think that's made a big difference. I mean, you do get some of the forums where people go, "Oh, stop going on about Rally Raid." Well, if it wasn't for Rally Raid, to be honest, you wouldn't have as many CBX 500s out there, because people buy them to farkle them up. I mean, Greg did that. He bought an older one that probably cost him, I don't know, maybe about $3,000 or $4,000. Don't know how much
I
it
think
was, but he
paid about 2.7 or 2.8 for it. I think.
Well, he got a bargain. And then you chuck, a couple of grand's worth of upgraded kit on there. You've got a $5,000, a bike that costs half as much as an Africa Twin, half as much as a Tiger, and will do everything that they do.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense to me. There's less weight, but you've got a bike that's capable of going on the motorways and cruising at 75, 80 or whatever, and taking some of the bumps as well off road. No, it's a good compromise. I think it sounds to me.
Well, I mean, there's the whole discussion over big bikes versus small bikes. People go on about, well, if you're going to go off road, you want like a 250. That's fine, and I totally get that. If you're going out green laning for the day, you'd want like a 250, a Honda 250 Rally or something like that. But if you're going to do a long road trip, you're going to want an Africa Twin, or you're going to want, God forbid, a GS 1200 or a Tiger or something like that. But if you've got a mixture where you're going on and off roads, the TAT or the TET or the TCAT, Trans-Canadian Trail.
Right, I've not heard of that.
Oh, that's huge. You should look that one up. If you're going to be doing something that's road and off-road, you want something that's in the middle. You don't want something that weighs, 300 kilos or 250 kilos even, and you don't, you need something you can actually manhandle across the mud. But when you get on the road, you don't want to be sitting on a 250 doing 400 miles in a day. That's not.
It all makes sense to me. You're preaching to the converted on this podcast, that's for sure.
I mean, I've been out on a run with the TRF. One of the things I did when I was, I committed to the idea of going on this trip after I bought the bike and I put some road miles on it. I went out with the TRF for a day and we did 100 miles of green laning. And I showed up. Brave. They're on their, KLRs. Some guy on a small Bimmer. They're on 250s, and they looked at this thing like, "What is this? This is a road bike. Why is it even?" Now at the end of the 100 miles, they were looking at it a very different way.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. So you've done an 11,000 mile trip in the US. How long were you planning? How long was the trip in planning for?
You mean how long was I planning it for?
Yeah.
I kind of threw it together. I had started to put the groundwork in place, and I was planning on leaving late July, early August. But things changed. I thought, well, between me going on the trip, or between the February and me going on the trip, I'm going to pick up some short-term IT contracts just to bring the pennies rolling in while I put everything together and then get on the plane and get over there. And I ended up contracting at the Bank of England, and that just came to a screeching halt one day because basically the agency I was working for couldn't organize a piss up in a brewery. And the Bank of England had enough of dealing with the agency, and I unfortunately was the collateral damage. So one day in mid-June, they turned around and said, "Oh, we're going to cancel the contract." So I said, "Okay, enough is enough. There's no point in waiting." So I literally came home from the Bank of England after my contract was cancelled, called up Air Canada, booked my tickets, and booked the place on the plane for the bike, and ended up going 3rd of July, which was about a month before I planned. But
wow! So this is on Air Canada's Fly Your Bike program, I believe it's called.
That's correct.
So your bike usually flies with you, by the sound of things.
Yes. Yes.
And so that sounds amazing that you can actually rock up at the airport. They put your bike on a pallet, or you put your bike on a pallet. Yep. You see it get put onto the plane. Hopefully, if all goes well. You travel with your bike and you ride out of the airport at the other end. I'm sure there's more to it than that.
No, that's pretty much it. The way it works is you call up Air Canada, you book your seat tickets. Your seats on the plane for the flight out and the flight back. There was initially some umming and ahhing because I was under the impression that you had to fly out of, because I'm used to, like everybody else, is, you fly to one airport, you do your holiday, you come back from the same airport. And I thought, okay, what I'm going to have to do is, fly the bike over there, ride across the States, do the whole trip, and then ride all the way back across the States to get back to the airport to fly back. And when I called up Air Canada, they said, well, no, you don't have to do that. You can do this. You can fly into one airport on the East Coast, do your trip, and then fly back from the other airport, another airport on the West Coast. You don't have to fly to and from the same airport.
Wow. It gets better.
That made it a lot easier. So I booked up the tickets to fly from Heathrow to Vancouver. And then I bought the return was to come back Montreal. From Heathrow to Montreal, and then the return trip was to go from Vancouver back to Heathrow. Once you booked your tickets, your seat tickets, you then get in touch with Air Canada's cargo people, initially at Heathrow, give them the reference number of the tickets, and they then sort you out a slot or a space on the plane for your vehicle.
Incredible.
And then quote you a price, which is...
And how crazy is the price?
It's not crazy. This is the kicker. I mean, everybody goes on about shipping your bike, putting it in a container and shipping it across from one side to the other, which is actually what I did my Jeep back in the day when we moved over. But it was 650 quid.
No.
650.
Seriously?
650 quid to fly the bike from Heathrow to Vancouver. And then get this, from the other side of the States, the other side of Canada, which is another 4,000 miles. The flight back from the other side, back to Heathrow, was another 100 quid, 750 quid.
Unreal.
Absolutely.
We're just planning a trip, me and a few pals, to go to Morocco.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we're time constrained because of work and family commitments. And I'm just looking it up now that we got a quote to go from... drop the bikes off in Manchester, and they get dropped off in Algeciras, which is a Spanish port in the south of Spain, I assume. And that's £600.
Yep.
$595 each.
Yep.
So we could virtually go to Canada and back for almost the same money.
Yep.
That is, I guess you got to factor in your flight as well, but that makes that very attractive, doesn't it?
Yeah. See, once you're in Montreal in Canada, it's literally an hour to the US border.
Goodness gracious!
And,
Air Canada's going to be flooded at this rate. This is incredible.
Well, no, the funny thing is, it isn't. I mean, lots of people know about it, but I don't think I don't know I don't think they get oversubscribed. Sometimes space is an issue on the plane, but not necessarily because there's loads of vehicles traveling. But like I said, the bike was literally underneath my seat on the way out from the UK to Canada.
That's amazing. And there was an import EPA certificate and a visa that you had to sort out apparently as well.
Yeah, I found out almost at the last minute that if you're going to temporarily import a vehicle to the US, you need to go through their Environmental Protection Agency. And what they do, and it's free, what you do is you get in touch with the EPA in the States. You send them copies of your logbook, so your V5, so they can look up the chassis number and make sure that it's EPA compliant, because they've got it all on a database, because they sell the 500X in the States anyway, so it's going to be the same specs. So you get in touch with them, give it a bit more time than I did. You want at least 3 weeks for them to get you the certificate. Yeah, just get in touch with them. They'll tell you what they need. You send it over, and they send you a certificate back all by email. And then you just print it out and you put it in your massive paperwork that you carry on any trip like this. And funny enough, I was never asked for it once. But if they had have asked for it and I hadn't had it, there is a very good chance I would have got to Canada, who don't require it, ridden down to the States, and they would have asked for it, and that would have been the trip kind of over. Yeah. So it's good to have.
So the TAP then. So when I've read up on the Trans America Trail before now, there's one guy, is it Sam Carrero?
He's the guy that created it.
He created it, so he's pretty much done all of the mapping himself. And I think back when I looked a few years ago, he was charging for paper copies of the map. Is that still the case?
Yeah, he charges. Well, you've got various options now. You've got a roll map, like you'd have on a rally bike.
Okay.
You've got a roll map. You've got regular paper maps, like in a book, with probably tulips in there, tulip diagrams, if you ever use those. like they used to use on Rallycross, where
No.
basically it has next to the map, it has like a shorthand. If you look up tulip maps, it basically shows you a shorthand down the side of the map showing you where the turns are, where the corners are. You know, when you've watched Lombard RAC and they're reading off what's coming up next, it's because they're reading these tulips.
Yeah. So it's like a road book they're using the Dakar. Or
Exactly what
like
it is. But you can also get GPX files,
right?
Which if you've got a SatNav or any kind of, Garmin, or I use my phone, you can just load those on there with a mapping solution and you just follow the line. Yes, he does charge for them. There is another guy out there who a few years ago started making his own version, which is basically a complete rip-off of Kevin's work.
Well, isn't there something? It's like a matter of honor that anybody does the tat, that they they pay the money, and he asks you not to share it with anybody else because he's put all this effort and work in, and that's how he earns a living basically now.
Yeah, it is. And to be honest, I don't really have a problem with that. I mean, the guy goes out and he literally rides hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles every year and updates the maps on a regular basis, so that if there is any closures, if there is anything that's changed, if you do need to go a different route, then he puts the work in. I mean, the TAT used to go across Nevada, but due to various reasons, he's now changed the last sections of it. So now it actually goes up through Idaho and then out through Oregon. But he puts the legwork in. So do I think he justifies asking for us to compensate him for all the legwork that he's done year in, year out? I don't have a problem with that. And honestly, it wasn't that bad, especially as a GPX file, because he just sends you the files by email, you download them, and you've got everything you need to go 5,000 miles from one side of the country to the other. Yeah, I think it's worth it.
Absolutely. And can you remember how much that costs, roughly?
Off the top of my head, no. But if you look up the Trans-America Trail, he has a shop on there. You can either buy it as a complete package or you can buy it state by state, because not everybody does the whole thing in one go. There are people that do stages, so they might do Idaho 1 month and then go back a few weeks later or the following year and do Colorado and then Oregon. They do it in sections.
Were you camping or using hotels or a combination of all of the above?
Very mix and match. I winged it. I know a lot of people, they like to have it completely structured. They know which campsite they're going to be at every night. They know which hotel they're going to be at every night. They know exactly where they're going to be every day. But this was whole part of my winging it and not being structured like my other trips. So sometimes I would find a campsite, a proper campsite, a paid campsite. Sometimes every few days, especially when you need it, like a shower and to be able to do your laundry, I'd find a hotel. And sometimes I would literally throw the tent up by the side of the road, crawl in there and pass out.
Were there opportunities for rough camping as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't do it as much once I got further west, because I know from experience there are larger animals out there that might not be too pleased to see you in the middle of the night on their hunting territory and you're by yourself in the middle of nowhere. That's when you would go for more of an established campsite or a hotel. But back east, in Oklahoma and places like that, I would literally just drive until it got dark, until I was done, find a decent sized space by the side of the trail and throw up the tent. And that was it. That was my space for the night.
What percentage of the route that you took was road versus trail?
I think the actual Trans-America Trail is, I would say, 80% dirt road. So it's gravel roads, rocky roads, forest roads, mud roads. Because I did my own version of it, I would probably say I did, well, apart from my big loop down to the States, if you get down to LA and back, if you took that out, I probably did about 65 to 70% was gravel roads and the rest was tarmac.
And a lot of it is gravel road versus more technical, difficult terrain. I know you did some patches of quite technical stuff, but is it mainly gravel road or a bit of a mix?
You just think of it as green lanes. It's about as technical as most green lanes are. And by that I mean that it's not particularly technical. I know, people have actually ridden them on road bikes, and you can do it on a road bike with some knobbly on there. And I know people who have done it. I know a couple from New Zealand that did it just after I did. They actually rode from one side. They did the whole trail on Groms.
Really?
Yeah. They came over from New
My
Zealand.
word.
They did the whole entire trail on a pair of Groms.
That's impressive.
Yeah. So it's not
Sounds
particularly
painful as well.
technically challenging. However, having said that, there are options along the trail to do more challenging stuff. Like when you get to Colorado and the Rockies, I did what's considered to be the two easier passes, which are Cinnamon and Ophir Pass. But if you wanted more technically challenging, there's Black Bear, there's Engineer. You can. I think the thing about the TAT is everybody says, okay, it's a route. You go from one side to the other, you follow the trail. Well, yeah, you could do that. And I don't think you get to experience it. You just would follow a black line on a map for 5,000 miles. You need to think outside the box. You need to think, what's off this line? What's outside of this route? What else can I do? And you look around at some of the other routes, and Sam does actually have some options on his route that will take you into places that are more of a challenge. Especially if you're in a group and you feel like doing it, so you're not by yourself 200 miles from anywhere. You can go off and run some of these more technically challenging trails and then come back to the TAT and continue on. Or you can jump off it. And, if you're lagging behind by a couple of days, you can jump off and you can just tarmac east to west, miss out a few sections that aren't particularly challenging if you don't want to do them. And you're losing, and you've lost some time, and you gain your time back, and then you can get back to more challenging stuff and spend more time on it.
And I guess you're seeing a lot of the American countryside, but you can divert off it to go and, like, I think you went to the famous whiskey distillery, didn't you, and things like that. So presumably you can just pick and choose as to where you want to be and where you want to go.
Yeah, I think some people get a little religious about it. They say if you haven't ridden the whole TAT every single mile, then you haven't done the TAT. I don't think that's accurate. And I think even Sam says if you do the whole TAT, then you're missing out. The TAT is a route from east to west. You can do it west to east, but east to west. And I used it as just a basis. I didn't want to do Route 66. I didn't want to do 3,000 miles of I-40 or I-10 and just sitting there on tarmac watching the world go by from a freeway for days on end. I wanted to have a more interesting and challenging way of crossing the country from one side to the other. So that's why I decided the TAT was a good foundation for exploring your way across the states without doing all tarmac all the time. Having said that, as unexciting as some people would find staying on tarmac for 8 hours a day, just rolling along, and just doing highways all the way across one side to the other, I did find after a few days, I came to the realization that the TAT can actually be as boring, but in a different way. Because if you follow the TAT religiously, mile for mile, all you ever see is gravel roads and pine trees for countless miles. And that is as disappointing as just sitting there on tarmac, and as boring as just sitting there on tarmac. Which is why I think if you do the TAT, or if you're interested in doing the TAT, look at what's off the TAT, look at what's off the route, what you can go and explore to either side of it, see what's out there, so do some TAT, get some gravel. When you get done with just looking at pine trees and gravel, go look at the towns around, because you don't get to see the towns, you don't get to see the states, you get to see lots of forests and lots of gravel roads, but you don't get to see the states. You don't really get to see any people on certain sections. You don't get to meet the people that live there. You don't get to experience the states. You could be riding on a gravel road in the middle of Yugoslavia or Poland or Germany or anywhere in the world, because it all looks the same. So I think if you're going to do the TAT, use it as your base, but build onto it.
Yeah, makes sense. So how do you find, and maybe you've got experience of doing this, but how do you find, because you were 11,000 miles, about 6 weeks for the trip?
Yes, it was. It was 6 weeks.
So how do you find traveling alone?
I actually, there's two ways of thinking about it. You don't have the hassles of being in a group where, somebody doesn't want to start at the same time you do. Somebody doesn't want to stop the same time you do. Somebody wants to stop every half an hour to pee or take a bunch of little pictures, or, you don't have to deal with the dynamics of being in a group, which is a plus. You can just do your own thing all the time. However, there are times when you do miss other people. You do really feel the solitude. You go to a new place and you want to be able to turn around to your friends and say, "Hey, look at this! Isn't this cool?" And then you realize there's nobody there. It's just you, and you do feel like you're kind of missing out on that sharing experience. And obviously, there's places along the trail where the weight of feeling that, just how alone you are. And if anything happens, if you go around that corner up there and you hit a sandbar and you fall off and you hear your leg go snap, the realization that you're 100 miles from anybody really kind of hits you in the face. I mean, I had a spot device and I wouldn't have gone without it, a GPS tracker and emergency beacon.
Sure.
The idea of not having something like that, when there's no mobile phone service, no cell phone service, and nobody around, that would.
Does the spot thing work off satellite?
Yes, it just uses satellites. It doesn't use any cell service.
Right. Do you have to be conscious to press a button, or would it set itself off automatically?
No, it doesn't set itself off automatically. You do have to be conscious to push the button. So yes, if you've gotten to the point where you can't push the button, then you've got a problem. And the other thing is, and people do make this mistake, if you do have an emergency beacon like that, don't leave it on the bike. Don't put it in your tank bag. Don't mount it on your handlebars. Because if you and the bike part ways, and suddenly you're 20 feet away from the bike and you've got two broken legs and a broken arm and only enough fingers to push the button, but the button's 20 feet away or 50 feet away, or you've gone down the side of a cliff and the bike's still sitting on the road, or vice versa, you're screwed. So if you're going to use a spot or any other emergency beacon, strap it to your chest, strap it, where you can reach it with one hand. Actually, sorry, let me change that. Put it somewhere you can reach it with either hand. Because you want to double your chances of being able to reach that button if things go wrong.
But it all went very well, so you didn't need to use it, obviously.
I didn't, but the nice thing about Spot, and I think it's Garmin, they do a emergency beacon. You can also set it up to use it as a tracker. So every X minutes, you can set the delay. You can actually have it send a beacon, which will go through satellites, and people can actually track you on Spot's website or Garmin's website and see exactly where you are. So if you don't report in, people can see where you were and where the last beacon was sent from. It's very, very useful. I mean, I've been using an application called View Ranger for 12 years on various mobile phones, and that actually has a thing called Buddy Beacon in there, which does a very similar thing. It'll send a ping every X minutes up to a website where people can follow you online, so they can see where you are. But obviously, that's cell phone, or that relies on cell phone masts.
Yeah.
Middle of the Mojave, not a lot of cell phone masts. So you want something that doesn't rely on cell service, which is where Spot and Garmin come in.
Whilst you were travelling around, I'm assuming you met lots of folk while you were over there. Were there many other people on the trail, or were you just meeting people in more built-up areas?
Again, a combination. When I went over there, I've actually got a friend that I've known for a long, many years, but I haven't seen in quite a few years, and she actually lives up in Massachusetts. So when I landed, got the bike over, I ended up staying with them for a couple of days. Then I went down the East Coast and stayed with my sister-in-law in North Carolina. Eventually, I got out to LA where I stayed with my other sister-in-law and met some friends that I used to ride with. When I got up to Portland, I stayed with another friend that used to be a messenger with me. But along the way, yes, I'd also meet, people in the towns. And this is why it's important to get off the trail, because you don't meet anybody when you're out there. I mean, people say, oh, you'll meet the other tats. You'll meet the other people riding the tat. You won't. It's 5,000 miles. The spacing between anybody else who may be riding at the same time as you is very, very sparse. So if you're planning on meeting other people on the tat, you're not going to. So getting off the tat, getting into the towns, meeting people, seeing what they do, who they are, is all part of the experience. I did actually ride with some people for a while who were also doing the tat in a small group. So yeah, it's just, again, it's a combination. You can use it as a way of meeting people that you've known on Facebook or the internet, or people you actually know in real life. If your paths happen to be on the same path, if you like, if you're going to be coming to a town near them, you can go see them and hang out with them. You'll get to meet new people. It's all part of the experience.
And what were people's reception like when they found out what you were doing? I guess it was generally positive. People don't have a problem with what you were doing over there?
Oh, no, as far as that goes, it was all very positive. Yeah, I mean, they are, obviously, I think if I had a pound, or even better, a pint of beer, everybody said, what's those number plates from? And you're doing what? You're from England and you're doing what? You're riding the whole way across the States? Well, who are you doing it with? Well, I'm doing it by myself. You're what? You're riding solo across the States. It can generally come down to a combination of admiration and you're absolutely nuts. I mean, who would come 5,000 miles to ride another 11,000 miles across some very remote country in the middle of nowhere with no backup, no support? I mean, this isn't the long way round. I didn't have, 5 different support vehicles behind me and a camera crew and a whole satellite team. It's just some guy on his own. And yeah, a lot of people, like I said, were quite amazed that I was doing it, incredulous, proud of it, and thinking I was nuts.
Is there any other words of advice you could give to people wanting to do something similar?
Do it. Don't find reasons not to. Don't put it off till next year. Don't put it off till one day, because one day will just never, ever happen. There are times when I kind of regret doing it, because obviously my job situation, I bailed out of a job and it's taken me a long time to get back into another one. And the money I spent on the trip, not having that money now has made life a little harder. But you know what? I wouldn't change it. I would not change it. If you get the chance, if you get the opportunity, and even if you don't make the opportunity, and it doesn't have to be the TAT, go do the TET in Belgium, go do the TET in France, go do the TET in Germany. It's a week at most for each one, and it won't cost you a lot of money. Just do it. I mean, even do the TET UK. Sections of the TET UK. I mean, literally, you can go out of your front door, ride a little ways down the road, down the motorway, and you'll have a section of TET somewhere near you, the UK TET. I mean, it goes from the south coast all the way up to Newcastle, I believe.
Yeah, it kind of runs along through southeast to southwest, and then through Wales into Cheshire, across to Buxton and that neck of the woods, and then up through the lakes. I think it does some of the Dales as well, possibly, and then across here to Northumberland. Yeah,
but it's right there.
It's amazing.
Just go out, do it. You don't have to do, you don't have to do the long way around. You don't have to do a long way down. You don't have to do all of the TAT. You don't have to do all of the TET, which is 38,000 kilometers, I believe, or something crazy. Just go out of your front door, go down the road. You can spend a weekend doing a section of TET.
That's great. Great advice. And what's been a revelation to me, Tim, is how relatively cheap it is to get yourself across to the US and do it. I was expecting thousands of pounds rather than hundreds of pounds, and that makes it a lot more doable as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, the thing about flying your bike over there, and to be honest, Air Canada is the only carrier that does it. None of the US carriers do it, because they consider motorcycles to be hazardous goods because they're full of things that burn.
Yeah.
But
so on aeroplanes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's kind of the point. But Some people,
Yeah.
they talk about shipping your bike over. In fact, there was a group of about 14 guys that were going to put their bikes onto the plane, onto the planes and fly them over and do, more of a road version than the TET. They ended up shipping their bikes over, and it cost them a lot more to put it in a container and ship it over by container, because one of the hidden costs is at the shipping ports, the container ports, is they actually charge you some interesting fees for processing your bike to come out of the container and onto the road. At the Air Canada version, I think you gave about 25, 30 quid for administration at the air terminals, at the air cargo places, to get your bike out. And the other thing to bear in mind is when you're shipping, there are many, many horror stories about you drop off your bike at the container port and it's going to get put in a container and it gets put on a ship and it takes 6 weeks to get to the States rather than on the flight with you. But there are plenty of horror stories about people that have gotten to their destination and gone to pick up their vehicle, gone to pick up their bike, and they get to the container port and there's nothing there. And they call up the shipping company and they say, oh, well, we haven't shipped it yet. What do you mean you haven't shipped it? Well, the container's not full. We don't ship the containers until they're full. When I heard of one woman, and this was on Horizons Unlimited forum, where she'd gone to South America for a 6-week trip from England, and she dropped off her bike several weeks before, flown over there, got into South America, no bike. Called up the shipping container or called up the shipping company. Well, where's my bike? Oh, it's still here in Harwich or wherever because we haven't sent it. Well, why not? Well, the container's not full. We're not going to put the container on the ship until it's full. Wow. Game over. And it costs more than ship, and it costs more than the fly your bike.
Thanks for listening. We really appreciate your support. Don't forget you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you really appreciate what we do, you could consider supporting us on Patreon or buy us a coffee. Links are available on our website, which is tampodcast.com, tampodcast.com, where we also have a limited selection of branded stuff. But either way, please keep listening and spreading the word. See you next time.